little piggy, Dexter Morgan. Dexter Morgan.
Dexter Morgan, good suburban husband, happy father of 3. The show's already started, but have they seen the feature presentation? Bane of the Bay Harbor Butcher, starring Dexter Morgan as himself.
Thanks for being here. If you like this story and want more, consider watching my video about social media influencers who joined the dark side and became killers. And now, your feature presentation. We all know the show, Dexter. He's the serial killer with a moral code, using his darkness to bring justice, even if it is to satisfy some deep-rooted need to kill. Yeah, the show is fictional, but what if I told you there is a tiny grain of truth to Dexter's story? Imagine being born into a world where violence and danger are waiting for you at every corner, even before you take your very first breath. That was the reality for Pedro, who was born in 1954 in a small town in Brazil called Minas Gerais, and his birth wasn't a normal birth. Pedro came into this world with a fractured skull. His father was a cruel man. He had beaten Pedro's pregnant mother so severely that even the unborn Pedro felt the blows. From that moment on, Pedro's life seemed destined for something dark, a downward spiral. Pedro was just a kid, a teenager, and by that time he had already crossed a line that few ever do. At just 14, he took the life of his first victim. His first kill also wasn't some random act of violence. The man he killed was the deputy mayor of his small hometown, Santa Rita do Sapucaí. Again, this wasn't some arbitrary act of anger or passion. Pedro had a reason for taking this man's life, or at least he thought he did. The deputy mayor had fired Pedro's father because a security guard at a local school accused him of stealing food from the school's kitchen. Angry and seeking justice for what he saw as a grave injustice done to his family, Pedro took matters into his own hands. He grabbed his dad's shotgun and headed over to the town hall. It was like a scene out of a movie. He walked right up to the mayor, told him what he'd done, and then, well, let's just say things got a little heated. Pedro didn't stop there. Sure, the mayor who fired him was out of the picture now, but the security guard who framed his father was still out there walking free, and Pedro wasn't going to stand for it. So, Pedro tracked him down and killed him too. Just like that, Pedro became a wanted man and something of a vigilante. Now, Pedro was on the run, a fugitive from justice. He'd fled to Mogi das Cruzes, a bigger city with bigger problems. But even there, Pedro couldn't escape his past. The city was a hotbed of crime, especially in the drug world. Pedro, with his quick temper and knack for violence, found himself right at home. He started taking down drug dealers one by one, robbing their dens, killing the bad guys. It was like he was a superhero, a real-life vigilante. People called him Padrinho Matador and Lil Petey Killer. The media was chomping at the bit for a little piece of his story and ate up every crumb. It was a juicy tale of a young guy standing up to the bad guys. But Pedro wasn't all about violence. He had a soft side too. He fell for a girl named Maria. Pedro called her Botinha. They were inseparable, a couple against the world. It felt like he'd finally found something real, something to hold on to. Then, Botinha got pregnant. They were over the moon. But happiness never lasts. A rival gang leader, looking for revenge, balanced the scales and savagely killed Botinha. Just like that, she was gone. Just like when Dexter's mother was brutally killed in front of his very eyes. In that moment, Pedro changed forever. Grief and anger consumed Pedro after Botinha's murder, and that turned him into a relentless force. He vowed to find every single person involved in her death and to make them pay, like a villain for justice, a hero seeking revenge, for ripping the woman he loved from his arms, and he would stop for nothing and no one, tearing apart anyone who got in his way. One by one, Pedro hunted down every member of the gang, not just a couple of them, every last one. He tortured them, killed them, and didn't stop until the gang was completely wiped out. His thirst for revenge was satisfied, but just like with Dexter, there was something inside of him, a need to kill, a darkness. Pedro soon faced another devastating loss. His father, the man whose actions had fueled Pedro's dark path, brutally murdered Pedro's mother with a machete. It was a sickening tragedy. And for Pedro, it wasn't just personal. He had to act. At this point, Pedro was already a seasoned killer and was serving time for a litany of murders. But that didn't deter him. He vowed to wreak a vengeful havoc, beginning with a chilling promise at his mother's funeral. and Pedro was not a man to break a vow. Being in prison didn't stop Pedro either, because after his father murdered his mother, he was incarcerated in the very same prison. Pedro devised a calculated, vindictive, and bloodthirsty plan. At just the right moment, he stalked into his father's cell and unleashed a savage attack, stabbing him repeatedly, 22 times in fact. In a final act of twisted defiance, Pedro ripped out his father's heart and took a generous bite. Later describing his actions, Pedro said he spat out the chewed heart back onto his father's lifeless body. For many, this would be the end of the story, a tale of unimaginable brutality. But for Pedro, it was just another notch on his belt. Even behind bars, Pedro's killing spree continued unabated. Prison at 18 years old didn't slow him down. In fact, it provided him with a fresh new hunting ground. Reports indicate that Pedro murdered at least 47 other inmates during his incarceration. Pedro justified these killings by claiming to target only those who deserved it, those that he deemed guilty of their own crimes and deserving punishment. Pedro often said that he only killed those who were guilty and refused to harm anyone that was innocent. This twisted logic earned him a twisted form of respect from some. Despite the tattoo that read, "I kill for pleasure," Pedro insisted that revenge was his sole motivation. Clearly, his reality is quite the stretch from ours. As time went on, Pedro's prison sentence grew. Initially sentenced to 128 years, his additional murders behind bars extended his punishment to a staggering 400 years. However, there was a caveat in Brazil's justice system at the time. The maximum sentence a person could serve was limited to 30 years, later increased to 40. So, despite his monstrous crimes, Pedro ultimately spent just over 3 decades behind bars. In 2007, Pedro was released from prison. After years of what he believed to be morally justified killings, Pedro seemed to turn over a new leaf. He found a job as a night watchman and tried to live a quiet life. But for a man with such a notorious past, it wasn't long before trouble found him again. In 2011, Pedro was arrested yet again, though the charges were less serious this time: threats, illegal weapons, and involvement in riots. He served a few more years and was released in 2018 for good behavior. Upon his release, Pedro made a surprising decision. He started a YouTube channel. On his channel, he shared his life story and urged others to steer clear of the criminal path that had consumed him. He spoke candidly about his past, hoping to prevent others from making the same mistakes. It was a wild and shocking transformation for someone who had once been one of Brazil's most feared criminals. But Pedro's story didn't have a peaceful ending. On March 5, 2023, at the age of 68, Pedro Rodrigues Filho's life was violently cut short. Outside a family member's home in São Paulo, he was ambushed by men in a black car. They opened fire, riddling him with bullets and slashing his throat before fleeing. As they left, they chillingly told Pedro's family, "This has nothing to do with you. Take your daughter and go inside." The mystery of who killed Pedro remains unsolved to this day. Like Dexter, Pedro believed in a twisted form of justice, seeking to eliminate those he deemed evil. Both men were driven by dark impulses from a very young age. They had a strange compulsion to punish the wicked, and both experienced tragic losses that pushed them deeper into darkness. For Dexter, it was the loss of his mother when he was just a baby. Then the loss of his wife, Rita, to the ruthless Trinity killer. For Pedro, the assault on his mother while he was still in the womb. Then the brutal murder of his pregnant girlfriend by a gang. These devastating losses ignited an unquenchable thirst, a darkness, a lust for revenge in both men. Dexter hunted down and killed bad people, while Pedro tracked down and mercilessly eliminated every member of the gang responsible for his girlfriend's death. Of course, there are some stark differences too. While Dexter adhered to a strict code that was taught to him by his police officer father, Dexter killed only murderers. Pedro's victims also included drug dealers. Unlike Dexter, who worked for the police department and was a blood splatter analyst, Pedro was not affiliated with law enforcement. Those details were added to Dexter's character to enhance the show's appeal. And of course, Dexter was based in Florida, while Pedro was born and raised in Brazil. Even though Dexter's story isn't a direct copy of Pedro's life, their striking similarities were enough to inspire the character and shape the thrilling series. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. If you found this video interesting, please show your support by watching another one and sharing this one. Sincerely, thanks for watching.